Indeed, God is present. And in the awareness of God's presence, let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence here and now. As we practice this awareness, so that we may carry this out into our day-to-day activities of being aware of your presence here, now. We see all of the activity happening around us. Some of it we agree with, some of it we harmonize with. Other activities we don't so much. Yet we know that you are present in each and every situation, in each and every circumstance, in each and every relationship, and we celebrate your presence. And in acknowledging your presence, we let go of our demand that the circumstances match our needs, that the situations unfold to meet our expectations, that the relationships are maturing to our fulfillment only. We let go of all of that. We acknowledge your presence. We acknowledge your love. And we look upon those circumstances and allow that our activity in those circumstances can lift and empower and help others. In that awareness of service, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. Sculpting the new you, or perhaps I should say, sculpting the new me. We're all in this process of engaging our life circumstances, and we have the opportunity in that engagement to see our responsibility as one of not just a passive participation, but rather as an active process. We have I've been talking about Brene Brown's work, Daring Greatly. And I'd like to move on to a classic unity text written by Eric Butterworth in 1968. Now it's 51 years old, and so it qualifies as a classic, I suppose, but actually Eric Butterworth was a well-known teacher within Unity from early on in his ministry. But discovering the power within you is really a nice overview of the breadth of Unity's principles. So we're going to be exploring Discover the Power Within You. And in looking at that text, in looking at our perceived reality, I'm fascinated by the gap between our perceived reality, what we think is true, and what the mystics of many different traditions tell us is true. There is a route from our perceived reality to the mystical reality, and that path is really what we're all about in this incarnation. We are charged with the responsibility. Whether or not we take up that responsibility or not is up to us. And perhaps that's the ultimate freedom. I was listening to the selection by the band, and our ultimate freedom is our choice as to how we engage this life experience. We can engage this life experience in a passive, laid-back, well, everything is fine approach, or very similar to that, we can engage it with a leaning in, everything is not fine approach. Either way, there is a I think there's a disconnection from that, either of those two assertive, active engagements versus a passive, laid-back engagement. And neither of those, I think, is the appropriate place for us, or the appropriate process for us. I think that the process for us is much more of a considered situation by situation decision as to whether or not we're going to let go and let God, or we're going to say that, hey, there's something here that needs to be changed, and I'm going to do what I can to facilitate that change. And often the question is, well, is this change going to be in the best interest of all, or is it just going to be in my own best interest? And that's the conundrum, is that we often get engaged in change when the change is motivated by our own self-interest and not the self-interest of others. There is a there's a Hindu myth that Brahma looked upon mankind, and mankind each and every one of them was aware that they were gods, but they were abusive of that knowledge. They abused their power of God, of being gods. So Brahma decided to take away the divinity from mankind and to hide it. But he couldn't figure out where to hide it. He called in a council of lesser gods to get their input. Where should we hide it? One of the lesser gods said, let's bury it deep in the ground. And Brahma said, no, that's just going to mean that some enterprising man is going to find it, dig it up, and then make it available again. Well, let's take it to the highest mountaintop, said another lesser god. And Brahma said, well, no, in time all of the mountains of the world will be climbed, and so we don't want to put it there because somebody will discover it and then they'll distribute it again to mankind. Well, let's bury it deep in the ocean. Well, no, that at some point that's going to be discovered. Brahma said, I know what I'll do. I'll hide the divinity of man within each person, because then it's going to be very difficult for them to find. And furthermore, it's not going to be a commodity that can be put on the open market. This is David's version of this, extension of this myth. It's not a commodity that somebody can package and sell. I mean, look at Nestle. I was startled that I could not find except a couple of alternatives to water, bottled water, that is not a Nestle brand. Arrowhead's a Nestle brand. I mean, you just go down through them. Nestle brand. Here's a Coke brand. There's a Pepsi brand. But there are very few alternative vendors for Nestle's water. And it was Nestle's CEO that in a couple of years ago made the statement that water is not a human right. And it was his objective, inferring that it was his objective, to corner the market on water and sell it as a Nestle brand of some sort, whether it be Arrowhead or whatever. So we have this attempt to package anything that's not nailed down and sell it. And it turns out that even in the divine marketplace, the Divinity Marketplace, we have these $5,000 weekend workshops where you can go and learn that you are God. It's just another thing that Brahma was trying to avoid, I think. Nonetheless, when we arrive at this reality that the mystics are probably right, at least their idea is worthy of consideration to the point of exploration and experimentation, then it's just a small logical step that if the mystics are right, that we are all divine, then it's our responsibility to realize that. It's our responsibility not just to acknowledge it, but to make it real in our experience, that to make it real in our practice, to make it real in our day-to-day, in our relationships, in addressing the circumstances and situations that we encounter, to take the responsibility for being that divine. So we have many religious traditions that have sprung up. Of course, we have the indigenous traditions. We have the Vedic traditions, out of which Hindu grew, and out of which Buddhism grew through Hinduism. We have the Taoist tradition. We have the indigenous traditions all around the world. And we have Judaism, and we have Christianity, and we have Islam. And each and every one of these traditions, in some way or shape, some form or matter, they are the mystical side of those traditions. And some of those traditions you'd be hard pressed to find the mystical side, but the mystical side of those traditions attest to the fact that we are divine beings, that we have the opportunity to realize the presence of God in each and every moment. And when we have that capability, when we have that realization, we have the capability, but when we have that realization, then it is up to us to take the steps, to explore, to experiment, to come to the realization, not because of some, Eric Butterworth refers to it as contrived convictions. Those convictions that one is expected to assume when one walks into a spiritual tradition. Well, since you're here, you need to believe these things. Well, I've tried to not just avoid that, but rather to dissuade you from that acceptance of a contrived conviction. I've said that, what I say is for your consideration and experimentation, not for your consumption per se, but rather check it out, see if it works for you. So we have these religions that have sprung up that have in some way pictured what the Godhead is and what our relationship with the Godhead is. And I'm reminded of the blind man who is trying to describe the elephant. You have a blind man on the trunk that feels the trunk and describes the elephant as a long, powerful snake, whereas you have a blind man back on the back leg feeling this monster leg, and he says that the elephant is like a tree. And then you have the blind man who is being whipped with the tail of the elephant, and the blind man, and that blind man says, no, God is in the air, and from time to time he just decides to whap you across the face. And so we have these different traditions that are picturing the Godhead, and it might be useful for us to consider that, well, maybe we are all blind. Maybe the Godhead is something that is different than any one of us has described. But if that is so, then how do we come into a realization not just of what the Godhead is, but also our relationship to it? And that's where our personal responsibility, our personal experimentation is applicable. Because it's up to us to decide for each of us what that Godhead should be. We have in the Christian tradition, we have springing up over the course of the last 2 millennia, a number of Christian sects that attest to the correctness of their perspective of what God is. And if they are Christian, then they are relying upon the teachings of Jesus to convey that. And as I've said many times, the teachings of Jesus are really difficult to pin down. Yes, we have the Gospels, and yes, we have the letters of Paul, and yes, we have the Scripture that attests to the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. But the problem is that there was no secretary there, and there was no recording device there to capture the words of Jesus. It's only an interpretation that is then written down, that is then reinterpreted. So not only do we have the language issues, not only do we have the idioms of the cultures that are different, but we also have a very sparse sampling of what the teachings of Jesus really are. But when Jesus was offered in Matthew 5:17, he was offered the opportunity to expound upon this. He says, and remember that we are that he was a Jew, and that his Jewish roots were in a tradition that saw God as out there, saw God as a being that could either be pleased or displeased, and that being would respond to that pleasure or that displeasure with either cursing or blessing. And so Jesus said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets," which were the two parts of the Jewish scripture. "I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, and until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until it is all accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So he's talking about, what do we do here? What do? We follow the commandments. And what were the two great commandments that he was prompted for?
Put God first, treat your neighbor as yourself.
Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Those were the two great commandments. So I would suggest that if we are going to be guided by the teachings of Jesus, we need to be guided by those two great commandments. When we acknowledge that it's up to us, then how do we do this? There's a quote that's attributed to Michelangelo about how did he sculpt this beautiful work, David. And the quote that's attributed to him is that, it was actually simple. I just took away everything that wasn't David. Well, it turns out that was not a quote by Michelangelo. I mean, I would love to think that it was a quote by Michelangelo, but it actually came from the Methodist Quarterly in 1858. This is the earliest reference to this take away that which is not. It is the sculptor's power, so often alluded to, of finding the perfect form and features of a goddess in the shapeless block of marble, and his ability to chip off all extraneous matter and let the divine excellence stand forth for itself. Thus, in every incident of business, in every accident of life, the poet sees something divine and carefully scales off all that encumbers that divinity and permits it to be revealed in all of its transcendent loveliness. That describes our charge, to take all of that which is not the divine loveliness and get rid of it. So that is our transformation, this huge gap from our perceived separation to this reality that we are one with God is just a matter of chipping away all of that which is not the divine goddess that is within us. It is a matter of our assessing each and every circumstance, each and every relationship, and deciding, how can I express my divinity more fully in this situation, in this relationship? How can I advance how can I advance the quality of life? How can I advance the experience of each person that is in my experience and help them realize their innate divinity? This is really our charge. And I have said many times, and I'm sure that you're tired of my confession that I'm not always aware enough to do that. Yes, I'm not always aware enough to do that. But the fact is that we each have those lapses in our awareness. And we can, in fact, remember, oh yeah, that's it, that's right, that's what my charge is. My charge is to reveal the divinity in myself and then do it. Make apologies, make amends, make a change in our behavior, whatever is necessary to be able to express that divinity within. So that is really our ultimate freedom. Our ultimate freedom, we celebrate the 4th of July with the fireworks and the hailstorms and rainstorms at the beginning of our bingo session. We celebrate all of those things, and we walk away and say, well, that's fine. Somebody else is responsible for that freedom. And no, I don't feel free because I still have my mortgage to pay, and I still have the schooling for my kids to take care of, and so on and so on and so on. But in fact, we are ultimately free in our opportunity to be that charge, that divine presence in every situation, in every relationship. Maybe not all relationships, not all situations, but when we remember we have the freedom to do that. That freedom to do that is powerful. The ability to do that is powerful. And every mystical tradition tells us that we have that ability. And all we have to do is decide, okay, if we are said to have that ability, let me try it. Let me give it a go. Let me run it up the flagpole and see who salutes. Let me give this opportunity, let me take this opportunity to give of myself so that I am expressing the divine that is within. So I am expressing the Christedness that I am. And let me see how that feels. Let me see how that works. Let me see the results of that practice. And if I am astute enough, if I am aware enough, if I'm willing to pay attention, I can use those experiments, those experiences, I can use that practice as a means of affirming that, yes, indeed, I am the David. And all I need to do is I need to chip away that which is not David. I am the Barbara. And all I need to do is chip away that which is not Barbara. And I am the Doreen. And all I need to do is chip away that which is not truly Doreen. I am the Christ. And all I need to do is chip away that which is not the Christ. And it can be hard, it can be frustrating, and it can be as if all my efforts are not coming to fruition. But nonetheless, I chip away all that is not the divine David. And in the end, we will see. Maybe it's not even in the end. Maybe it's in the middle. We'll see that we are truly that Christedness that the mystics tell us we are. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with I cast all my cares. As we acknowledge that this moment is sacred. Here in this space, here in this time, wherever the now is, The now is sacred. It is in the now that we have the opportunity to make changes. It is in the now that we have the opportunity to express that which we are. It is in the now that we have the power to be the divine essence that we are. It is in the now that we can demonstrate that. And in this now, I invite you to bring to mind some circumstance that has not gone along as you had anticipated. Perhaps disappointments, perhaps aggravations, perhaps relationships devolved instead of evolved, perhaps circumstances turned left or right when you were expecting them to go straight ahead. Bring to mind that situation. And acknowledge in that situation the part that you played. And allow yourself to acknowledge that you were responsible in that place, in that time, in that circumstance. You were responsible for some part of it. And if you acknowledge that your part was a contributing factor to the situation going south, the relationship being damaged, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for your part. Acknowledge that we're not always on top of it. We're not always aware of our Christedness. Forgive yourself and let it go. And learn from it. How would you have done that differently? What part would you have played with a higher awareness? What if you were looking out for the best interest of all concerned and not just yourself? What would have been the outcome if you would have given love unconditionally? And our task is not to foresee alternatives, outcomes, but rather to acknowledge the part that we play that can have a significant impact on outcome. Having forgiven ourselves for not having that, we allow ourselves to learn and to acknowledge that, yes, we have the ability to be better at the expression of our divinity. Breathing in and breathing out to that realization. Let us also commit ourselves to being more aware, to being more present, to being more the expression of the Christedness that we are. To allow ourselves the room to grow, to change, to evolve. And when we see situations arise where someone else is doing something that is less than, we let that happen without judgment. We may choose to intercede, but that is not because we have judged it poorly or improperly. We have chosen to intercede because we have something to give. unconditional love. We have assistance that we can provide. I'm just reminded of a situation that arose this last week. I was out leveling the stones on the patio, and two individuals passed each other, started arguing. They were ready to square off. And I yelled out, "Hey fellas, it's okay. Let it go. Back away. Continue on your path." They looked at me. They looked back at each other. Their fists came down. They backed away. They turned around and went on their separate ways. About an hour later, one of the fellows came by and he said, "I want to thank you. I want to thank you for interceding, because I don't want to go to jail. But that guy had pissed me off last week. I felt like I needed to say something to him. But I'm glad you talked me out of it. Thank you." We each have the opportunity to participate in that which is life around us. And if we can contribute unconditional love, if we can keep our focus on what is the best interest of all involved, we are chipping away that which is not the divine David. The divine Lee. The divine Patrick. The divine Joe. We have that power, we have that freedom, and let us practice. As we come back into this time and space, let us come back sharing the words of the Lord's Prayer. Which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. We'll take an offering for unity now. As we take our offerings in our hands, let us bless him with this offering statement. Together, please. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I give in love because I trust in God. And once again, Trinity Damask in your reverence.